From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries,
it came from the Maritimes.
The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but she has promises to keep. My co-host, Chelsea.
Hiding in the forest, peeking at us from behind a tree, my co-host, Evan. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of It Came From The Maritimes. Today, I'm going to be sharing a story about a Nova Scotia mystery that I really only learned about recently. So to add a little intrigue, I'm going to start us with a quote. We need the tonic of wildness. At the same time that we are earnest to explore and learn all things, we require that all things be mysterious and unexplorable, that land and sea be indefinitely wild, unsurveyed, and unfathomed by us. Henry David Thoreau. Evan, is your curiosity piqued?
It is very piqued.
I'm excited to hear that. What I'll be talking about today is a little hidden treasure in Nova Scotia. Most people from this province are familiar with Bears Lake. It's a bustling business park located just outside of Halifax. It's known as a local shopping district with increasingly heavy traffic over the years. But not many people know that tucked behind its busy roads, adjacent to the roar of passing engines, is a mysterious stone ruin. Now, Evan, had you ever heard of that before?
Honestly, before you brought it up, I had never heard of any of that. I think of Bears Lake, and I think of going to Costco. I think of going to the movie theater there, or just going to a big box store. I don't really think of going into the woods of Bears Lake. I don't know if I've even seen the lake of Bears Lake.
Right? That's why I was so surprised to hear that there was something tucked into the one little kind of forested section that's remaining. So what I'll be telling you about today is something called the Bears Lake Mystery Walls. Now, sitting on the top of the steep Geysers Hill, near the start of an old but now unused travel road extending from Halifax to St. Margaret's Bay, there are walls formed by stacks of flat, unmortared ironstone slate. They are thought to be the remains of a five-sided structure, a long wall adjacent to the main structure, and a staircase that now leads to nothing. The five-sided building remnants are 1.25 meters high and 1.3 meters thick. There are signs of an entrance amongst the five walls, and there's a fully contained stone box within that structure. The solitary long wall is 120 meters long, and it's about 2 meters in height, and the lone staircase that remains climbs 20 meters high. So these are some pretty substantial walls. It's not like a small stack of stones. Like, this was a serious structure.
Yeah, that's 20 meters high is really high when you think about it. And I'm very curious about a five-sided building. That's just a strange choice.
It is. We're going to talk about some of the possibilities for what it was soon.
Ooh.
I do find it's so eerie just seeing this staircase that it's quite a few steps, and it's so tall, and it just climbs up and then there's nothing. So there have to have been even more walls that were destroyed with time.
That, or there was something there that they need to get on top of.
Ho, the plot thickens. Now, these walls are thought to have existed for over 200 years. But they actually only became public knowledge in October of 1990. So that's pretty recent. Like, that's just a few years before I was born.
Yeah.
They were actually discovered during the development of Bears Lake Business Park. They were planning to expand Bears Lake right up to the highway. But when these walls were discovered, a local historian, Jeff Macdonald, contacted the Halifax Museum and the Chronicle Herald to raise awareness of the unique structure. They've been protected by the Nova Scotia Special Places Act since 1991, and luckily this piece of history has been retained and studied instead of destroyed with the rest of nature in that area. So the reason these walls are known to have existed for over 200 years is because a lichenologist actually studied the plant life on the walls in 1998. And this is so cool. He determined that the lichen growths on the stonework, they hadn't been disturbed in over 200 years. So the walls hadn't been used since at least 1798.
I never knew that you could study the lichen on a wall to tell that, so I'm impressed.
Right? I'm sure I would not understand any of the research, but I would love to read the science behind how that works. So there are a lot of theories that exist for what these mystery walls could have once been. Some of them are a little, maybe more far-fetched, but there's a few of them that seem to have some pretty solid basis. Now, one of the earliest theories is that this structure was built by the Vikings. So the reason they suspect this is because in 1000 AD, there's some kind of rudimentary records that suggest the Vikings explored Nova Scotia, and there's evidence that they traded with the Mi'kmaq people of the region. So that would have been from quite a ways back if those stone structures would have been built. The next oldest theory is that the structures were built by Prince Henry Sinclair. He was a 14th century Scottish earl who left Europe with the remaining members of the Knight Templar hundreds of years ago. And writings suggest that in 1398, he traveled to Nova Scotia on his hunt for the Holy Grail. Now, I thought this was cool because I had no idea that Nova Scotia had anything to do with the Holy Grail history. Or really, I'll be honest, I don't have a huge grasp of what the Holy Grail is or if it truly existed. But there's historical writings that indicate a Scottish earl was looking for it in Nova Scotia, so that's neat.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. His name also comes up related to Oak Island.
That's so cool.
This isn't the only place where they thought that he might have come to Nova Scotia.
Right. I don't want to spoil this too much in case we decide to dive into a future episode a little more in depth on it, but there's actually some stone ruins in New Ross, Nova Scotia, that there's apparently some more concrete historical evidence that Prince Henry Sinclair actually did build, and they're thought to resemble these stone walls from Bears Lake, so he seems to have gotten around a little bit. It's possible that when Prince Henry Sinclair landed in Nova Scotia, he built rudimentary stone buildings during his exploration of the area. Now, one of the more commonly accepted theories is that due to the five-sided shape of the structure, historians have suspected that it was possibly an early star fortress structure, and that the stone box within was an old container for ammunition storage. Apparently, that five-sided shape was common in military garrisons built in the 1700s, and they suspected that because this area was located high up on a hill, that it could have been a good area to be used as training grounds for soldiers. For example, the soldiers that were training for an attack on Fort Louisbourg in 1758, or maybe it would have been used in the early 1800s as a defense structure during the War of 1812. When you think of the Halifax Citadel, it's a star-shaped fort, so historians have suggested that the shape of this structure could have been a crude replica of the Citadel, just built in a smaller area. So the location of it on a hill, as I mentioned before, does support that military theory because it would have provided a great view. However, if it was a military garrison, there should be evidence of musket balls and shell casings, and there have been thorough searches of the land by archaeologists, and none have ever been found. Also, this area has never been mentioned in historic military records in Nova Scotia, and military papers are known for being meticulous and thorough in their documentation. So that's seeming a little less likely. Now, one of the more recent theories is that the structure was built by an 18th or 19th century farmer. This is actually something that is kind of new information to me, but makes sense based on the name. Apparently, the area now known as Dutch Village Road is an area that over 200 years ago was given to European settlers. So there were a lot of German farmers especially that were given land settlements there. So the soil under those rock walls is very rocky, so it wouldn't have been effective land for growing plants. But that area, based on records of Nova Scotia, which are apparently very thorough going back in time, prove that the area was logged in the 1760s. So the hills in what's now known as Bears Lake would have been a great grazing area for animals. One of the things I just find amazing is that there's records of what was logged in the 1760s. I can barely remember what I did last week.
No, honestly, especially when you consider how hard it is to keep records properly in digital format to be accessible, to think that paper has survived so long through all this time.
Right.
And especially with things like the Halifax explosion, which could have easily decimated a lot of records.
Yeah, it could have destroyed them. It's amazing that these documents still exist. The Nova Scotia Archaeology Society used something called X-ray fluoroscopy to analyze the soil chemistry in that area around the walls. Jonathan Fowler from St. Mary's University headed the project, and based on what they found, he thinks that the structure was a sheep pen. They found some levels of phosphorus in the soil. They didn't find necessarily the higher levels of phosphorus that they'd normally expect to find on farm soil because of the fecal matter and stuff like that. But if these hills were used as more temporary roaming pastures for animals, or even if there were only a few sheep on the property, if it was a smaller farmstead, the levels of phosphorus wouldn't be that high anyway. So Jonathan Fowler did some research, and he determined that the five-sided structure resembles old enclosures from the United Kingdom that were used on sheep farms to hold small groups of sheep for examination or treatment. And the location of the wall led him to think that it could have been used to herd sheep towards the pen as a way to kind of keep them in line. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's interesting, but to me that really doesn't explain the, 20-meter high staircase.
Well, see, that's the thing. There's just still so many questions about it that no one's been able to explain.
Because sheep don't need to go up in the air like that.
It makes you wonder. Based on the research, there's no signs of humans having actually lived in that area. So in areas that humans have inhabited, archaeologists will be able to find evidence of glass, pottery, or food waste. And none of that has been found over the years. There's also no signs that the structure would have been a house. One, the five-sided shape, not super traditional for homes. Then again, you never know. People have their own unique tastes. But the more concrete facts is that there's no remnant of a hearth, so no sign of a fireplace, which would have been needed back in the 1700s. And there's no openings that would have indicated window panes. However, historians have pointed out that even though these walls only became public knowledge in the 1990s, it's possible that people have been visiting the Bears Lake Mystery Walls for years. And even since the 1990s, it's very likely that people have removed artifacts from the area over the decades or centuries. So it's possible that there were signs of pottery or glass, or that the walls were higher at some point. And either through vandalism or just people taking things and not thinking about the impact, it's affected our understanding of what the structure truly was. So, will future revelations reveal the true origins of the Bears Lake Mystery Walls, or will their origin continue to evade us? Even if their story remains elusive, the next time you're in the Bears Lake area, consider the history, and maybe even consider a small hike to see the mystery walls for yourself. So, Evan, which theory do you think makes the most sense if you had to pick?
In my mind, the military base makes the most sense to me. It's the only reason I could see there being that really tall staircase, because they would want to get up higher to be able to see farther.
Right, like a look-off or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm apparently going to need to do a hike in Bears Lake now just to check them out.
I've studied a lot of pictures of the Bears Lake Mystery Walls. The book and website Atlas Obscura did an article about them, and that's part of how I learned about them originally. It's so fascinating to me, just this little slice of history that still hasn't been figured out. Part of me likes that it's a mystery because I feel like, I don't know, lots of room for conversation around it.
Yeah, it's kind of just, there's a lot of these little things, like you said, that other stone structure in New Ross as well, where it's just kind of no explanation.
Right? This past summer, I did a hike at the Keji Seaside Adjunct, and there was just this old stone foundation there. Now that one's less of a mystery because there was a plaque describing that it was an old farmhouse and stuff, but just you think of how much history there is in the area, and it makes you wonder what it could have been, what all these old buildings could have been.
Honestly, though.
I think it would have been so cool for archaeologists to have gotten to study this area before things were potentially removed. Because even these days, it's if you see pictures, it's people let their dogs and kids crawl all over the walls. So it makes you wonder, were the walls originally higher and had evidence of a window? And it's just been kind of knocked down over the years, but we'll never know. I think they do actually have cameras up in the area now just to try to deter vandals from further damaging the spot while it's studied. But apparently it's quite hikeable. It's just a short little trek through the woods. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of It Came From The Maritimes. You can find us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook at It Came From The Maritimes, on X, formerly Twitter, at ICFT Maritimes. And please, if you have any Atlantic Canada folklore you'd like us to cover in upcoming episodes, email us at itcameFromTheMaritimes@gmail.com. Now, Evan, do you have a folklore tip for us today?
I do. Our tip for this episode is, if you dream about a key, it means a secret will be revealed.
Ooh. Maybe someone will one day dream up the secret of what the Bears Lake Mystery Walls truly are.
We can only hope.